As a parent, is there anything that you can do to maximize the possibility that your kids will be financially successful, that they're not going to struggle on the edge of poverty for their entire lives? Even more than that, if you're the person who is first generation wealthy, what can you do to ensure that you don't spoil your kids and they don't end up squandering the wealth that you've created? Because on one hand, you want to set them up for success, but you don't want to go too far and end up crippling them. You want to give your family a better life, but you don't want to raise people who are dependent on you forever. Many people approach this problem by trying to just split the difference and find the right balance between the two. Now, I'm going to show you why there's not only not a proper balance between those two, but it's actually looking at the problem entirely wrong. In fact, there are 4 very simple things that you can do. These will drastically increase the chances that your children grow up to be strong, capable adults who will not only have the skills to create their own wealth, but will also be able to bear the burden and the responsibility of the inheritance that you pass on. This is the 4 pillars to generational wealth that lasts, and I promise you, this is not what you think. This is not asset allocation, this is not risk tolerance, this is not an investment strategy or anything like that. And if you're wondering who I am and why I have anything to say about this, my name is Joe Brown. In 2019, I quit my job as a stockbroker. Now I run Heresy Financial University, the membership community where I teach how markets work so that you can make more money investing. And I've personally studied the lives and practices of dozens of ultra high net worth individuals who have talked specifically about this topic. Some of them, they came from wealth, they're second, third generation wealth, or even more. So they're talking about success stories that have led that wealth to be preserved this whole time. Others, first generation wealth. They grew up dirt poor and they've had to go on this discovery journey for themselves and they've shared what they've learned. Now, I myself, when I got married, my wife and I had $30,000 in debt. We had no money in our checking account and I was making about $4 per hour. In other words, like most people, we started off flat broke. Now, a little over 10 years later, I run a business where my personal take-home income is 6 figures per month, 7-figure net worth, and I have 2 kids that are elementary school age, which is why I've spent so much time studying this topic. Because I believe, as somebody once said, that it is not your fault if you don't come from a wealthy family, but it is your responsibility that a wealthy family comes from you. Now, there are 2 myths that people usually believe about this topic, and we've got to bust those myths first before we look at the 4 pillars for generational wealth that lasts, because we have to overcome these logical fallacies, which is what they are. Otherwise, the 4 pillars, they just won't make sense. So myth number 1 is that your hard upbringing is what made you who you are. In other words, you got rich because you grew up in poverty. It made you hard. It gave you the grit. It gave you the determination. In other words, the myth is that poverty creates the conditions that allow wealthy people to emerge. As a result of this, many first generation wealthy say, I'm not leaving my kids a single dime because I didn't get any of it when I was a kid. Nobody left anything to me, and it's because of that that I became wealthy. So here's why this is a logical fallacy. So number 1, if poverty itself were sufficient for creating wealth, there would be no second generation poor. Let me say that again. If poverty were sufficient for creating wealth, there would be no second generation poor. I mean, think about it. Were your parents rich? Probably not. They were probably poor. But even if your parents did have money, go back far enough and everybody's ancestors were in poverty. You go back to being a hunter-gatherer. I mean, that's subsistence level life. They own literally nothing. That is poverty. That is the default to life, is poverty, just nothingness. So if poverty itself were sufficient, meaning that's all you needed to have a wealthy person emerge in the next generation, then there would be no poor people today. It would be impossible to have a second generation after that poverty that would be poor, and therefore everybody today would be wealthy. Clearly, that is not true. Now, you're probably looking at this and thinking, oh, well, of course, nobody thinks that poverty is sufficient for creating wealth, but we think poverty is necessary for creating wealth. Okay, well, if poverty were necessary as a starting condition to have somebody grow up and be able to create wealth, then there would be no second generation rich people. Because anybody who grows up with their parents who have wealth would then necessarily not be able to be wealthy themselves because they didn't have the starting condition that was necessary of poverty. Obviously, that is false as well. There are plenty of very famous families throughout history where the wealth lasts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations or longer. And so poverty cannot be necessary for the creation of wealth. And so, because second generation poor people and second generation rich people both exist. Poverty can neither be necessary nor sufficient as a starting condition to create a wealthy person. So the question of how much poverty should I force my kids into so that they can grow up to be successful is a non-starter. Poverty does not factor into that equation. Which brings us to myth number 2, because a lot of you are watching this and thinking, man, that's crazy to think, because nobody in their right mind would think poverty was necessary or sufficient. Obviously, you've got to get dealt the right hand. Wealth comes from wealth. You got to have money to make money. And so myth number 2 is that initial wealthy circumstances are what caused wealth. Meaning if you want to be wealthy, you've just got to be born into a wealthy family. This is a logical fallacy as well. Here's why. If wealth itself were sufficient for creating future wealth, there would be no such thing as second generation poor. There's a reason the saying shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations exists across estate planning offices, financial planners, family offices. It's a very common saying among high income, high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals in those communities. It's because many people see this happen over and over and over again. You don't do the right thing when you're raising your kids, the money goes down, it's spent, it's wiped out, and within 3 generations, all of family wealth was both made and lost, and your family is back in poverty. So if being born into the right family where your parents are wealthy was sufficient for the creation of wealth in that second generation, then there would be no second generation poor. Now, again, there's going to be people looking at this and saying, nobody thinks that it's sufficient, but it's definitely necessary. Okay, so if wealth was necessary for having that second generation also be wealthy, then here's the kicker. There would be no wealth at all in existence. You go enough generations back, your ancestors are hunter-gatherers. The default state is poverty. We are born into this world with nothing and we leave this world with nothing. All wealth that exists today was created. Wealth is not a zero-sum game where it's just exchanged. Wealth is created, it can also be destroyed. If humans today decided that we just wanted to light on fire all of the consumption capital and all of the investment capital that we have, burn all the banks down, wipe out all the servers that house all the money at the banks, nuclear holocaust around the world, that's absolutely possible, and it would plunge our world into absolute destitute poverty. We would have nothing. And all that stuff and all those things and all that wealth has been created. It was not just naturally here. So again, if wealth itself was a necessary starting condition to have wealth happen over here, then there couldn't be any wealth today because the starting conditions initially were zero wealth. And so, in summary, for this myth, because second generation poor people exist, and because some wealth at all exists, then wealth itself can neither be a necessary nor a sufficient starting condition to create future generations who are wealthy. Therefore, because both of these are myths, your poverty growing up did not create your wealth, and your wealth will not cause your kids to become poor. But again, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations is a real phenomenon. It's a saying for a reason. But as we've seen here, it has nothing to do with how much you pass on or how much you hold back, those conditions you force your kids into. Those are logical fallacies, they are non-starters. So, what is the blueprint? Where should we be focusing our effort if we indeed want to set our kids up for success? Pillar number 1, you've got to teach by example. I've seen this all the time in my personal life with clients that I've worked with, where you have the first generation who's created that wealth and they never have let their kids in on any of their wealth creation. They don't talk about it. They don't allow them into that part of their lives. Money is a dirty little secret that is not talked about. And so their kids just grow up with a magical money tree that just pays for all their expenses and have no comprehension of what it takes to build the wealth or protect it or preserve it. And it's worth understanding here how humans actually learn. The most common way that people are able to learn, and especially with kids, is through something called mirror neurons. Essentially, people learn by watching, by being around other people who do something. That is the easiest and most effective way at teaching and learning, is being in close proximity with somebody who's doing that thing. This is why people always say you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. It's because of mirror neurons. This is why you look at your kids who are growing up and you think, they're a spitting image of me, or they're a spitting image of their mom. It's like, yeah, that's how people learn. We watch and we copy, we emulate. That's what training is. Very rarely do people have effective learning or teaching through simply preaching, just teaching, just talking, just telling. Usually what happens is it looks good for a while and it all goes out the window because you've been saying one thing to me your entire life, but you've been doing something completely opposite. So I'm not going to do the thing that you've been telling me to do. I'm going to do what I've learned to do with my eyes, what I've been trained to do, what I've seen with my mirror neurons. That's how people learn. And so if you've learned how to create and protect wealth, teach your kids the same stuff by allowing them in on it with you. Teach by example. Do it with them. Have them do it with you. Be open about it. Now, real quick note, if you're discouraged about this and you're thinking, well, that actually requires that I know something about money, that I know how to make money, that I know how to increase my income drastically, that I know how to create a large net worth. On one hand, yes, absolutely. And if you don't, you're not going to have anything to pass down anyway. Now, real quick, a note, just in case you're sitting there discouraged thinking, man, pillar number 1, I'm already too late. I can't teach my kids how to be wealthy someday because I don't know how to be wealthy. It's already past that time. I haven't made a large income. I haven't made a large net worth. I don't know how to teach by example because I don't even know how to do it myself. Don't worry. There is a silver lining on this that I'm going to give you a bonus at the end of these 4 pillars. So it's definitely not hopeless, but it should feel kind of like a kick in the butt because yeah, if you want to be able to have something that you can pass down to future generations, you got to have something to pass down to future generations. If you want to be able to teach by example, you've got to be able to do the thing you're trying to train to do. All right, number 2, this is something that pops up very, very commonly among 2nd or 3rd or 4th generation wealthy families. This is a theme where they pretty much universally say their parents or their grandparents were very good at doing this one thing. And pillar number 2 is never solve your kids' problems. Never do something for them that they can do for themselves. Now, here's the real hard truth about this one. People, as individuals, it feels good to be a problem solver. It feels like you have meaning, that you have worth. If you can come into somebody's life and you can do something for them, you can fix something for them, you can solve their problem. That feels good. But if you are parenting based on what feels good for you and not what's in the best interest of your children long term, you've got some looking in the mirror to do. By allowing yourself to sit in the discomfort of watching your kids struggle through solving a problem, not knowing how to do the problem that you could very easily step in and just take care of for them. It's hard, it's time consuming, and it's uncomfortable. But problem solving in and of itself is the skill that allows anybody to be successful at anything in life. And if you never allow your kids to solve their own problems, they never learn how to solve problems. They will have to be dependent on you because you're the only one who can solve their problems. And then they will resent you and you will resent them. So don't rob them of those opportunities to become competent, even if it is a struggle for everybody involved. Pillar number 2, never solve their problems. All right, pillar number 3 for generational wealth that lasts. Talk openly about money. This is something that almost universally people struggle with. It is difficult to be open about money, especially with your children. You don't want them going and talking to their friends about how much you have, how much you don't have, mistakes you've made, successes you've had. You don't want that getting out there into the wrong ears. You don't want people knowing your business. And ultimately, it's your wealth. It's your financial situation. It's not your kids, right? Well, the hard truth here is that money is a part of life. And finance is a language of its own. And languages, just like all languages, they have to be learned. I'm sure every single one of us knows people personally who their parents are fantastic with money. They've built up a very large nest egg, have a very high net worth, have had great incomes their whole life, are entrepreneurs, have owned their own businesses, and their kids know absolutely nothing about money. The very basics of budgeting and debt and investing, they're foreign concepts to them. And as a result, they've struggled for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years financially because they don't have the skills, let alone the comprehension or the understanding of these topics. The truth is that if you hide your financial successes from your kids, they'll never be able to absorb those lessons that you could pass down about how to handle such a responsibility. That wealth that you have to pass on will be too much of a burden to be able to, for them to be able to bear, they won't be able to handle it. They'll lose it. So as early as possible, as often as possible, talk about complex financial topics with your kids. Pretty much every night at dinner with my family, we talk about what I did during the day. And yeah, I happen to be in an industry where I'm doing work that is just inherently about money and trading and investing. But when we go shopping, we talk about how much things cost relative to how much other things cost. And they're kids. They see a swing set and they think it's the most expensive thing in the world. And they think that a house is cheaper. And so when you tell them, oh yeah, I could afford to buy you that swing set, but I'm not going to. That's a lot harder of a conversation to have. It's a lot easier to say, oh no, I can't afford it, and just train your kids that if there's something that is above a certain price point, then it's just out of their reach, rather than training them, oh, there are things that you could buy that you have to choose not to because you want to do something else with your money, even though that might make your kid feel bad because they're not getting something that they want. Sure, it could be a little bit of a harder conversation in the short run, but you're training them the real habits and the real choices. Talking to them openly, or around them at least, about budgeting, about debt, about investing, about compound interest, about trusts, about estates, about wills, about life insurance. As early as possible and as much as possible, discuss these matters openly so that they are hardwired to understand these things as if they are part of everyday life, because guess what? They are. All right, and pillar number 4 could be the pillar all on its own. If this is the only thing you do, this one is the most important, and it is understanding that the real true inheritance that you pass on is the skill necessary to create wealth. Wealth creation, money making, wealth preservation, these are skills. They are learned. It is correct actions that lead to outcomes. They are not talents. They are not gifts. These are not outcomes caused by external circumstances. They are just skills to be learned. And the reality is external circumstances can absolutely change. Political regimes can change. You can have everything taken away from you. Things outside of your circumstance, outside of your control, can cause you to lose everything. But if you have the skills necessary to create wealth, nobody can take that away from you, and you can always build it back again. If you pass on to your kids the skills necessary to create and preserve wealth, nobody can take that away from them. The country laws change, the future changes, the political regime changes, something is taken away from them, but they have the skills. That's really truly what is necessary to have generational wealth that lasts. Because like we discussed earlier, it wasn't your poverty of your initial circumstances that caused you to be able to create wealth. And it's not going to be the fact that they grew up with parents who had wealth that will cause them one day to be poor. It was your skills at producing wealth that caused you to be wealthy. And just like you, for your children, it will be their skills at producing wealth that will be the only thing that can keep them wealthy. All right, I do have a bonus pillar for those of you who think that it's too late. You're sitting here thinking, I want to set up my children for financial success, but I'm probably not going to have really much, if anything, to pass on. Yeah, I've got a little bit of a nest egg, but by the time I retire, burn through that, probably medical expenses, there's really not going to be much left. I've waited too long, made too many mistakes early on. Is there anything that I can do to make sure that my children grow up set up for financial success? And on one hand, just go back to number 4. It's the skills, it's not the money you pass on. But even more than that, I would say for this bonus number 5, it's being open and honest about your mistakes. Now, I did not come from wealth, but I had a fantastic childhood, like many advantages that most people don't have. Even the fact that my parents stayed together forever, like they never got divorced. That in and of itself is like statistically a huge predictor of future financial success. My mom stayed home. My dad had a great job all the way, but they did make a ton of financial mistakes. They lost everything that they had in the great financial crisis. They were constantly in and out of deep credit card debt. But here's the reason why, number 1, I don't resent that. And I actually am very thankful for that, is because they were always open and honest about their financial mistakes. They never tried to hide it from us. We always knew about it. And the key thing here is they never blamed outside circumstances or things outside of their control. Many people just give into that temptation to point fingers at the government. If only this person had done that. If only the bankers would have gotten in trouble and we wouldn't have lost our houses and this wouldn't have happened and this market wouldn't have crashed and there wasn't this manipulation and the whole thing is rigged, and if I wouldn't have lost that job or if somebody would have helped me out and I would have been able to get a degree, then I could have gotten the promotion. And all of these are pointing fingers. And again, just like kids growing up, mirror neurons, how we learn, you raise kids who are trained that financial circumstances are what determine your outcome, that nothing is of my own control. If you're not open and honest with your kids about what your mistakes were that led to those outcomes that you have right now, that cause you to not be where you want to be, then they will grow up thinking that financially speaking, nothing is inside of their control. They will think that the world is out to get them, that they are a victim, and there's nothing that they can do. They won't understand that wealth building is a skill, something they can learn to do. I was very fortunate to grow up with parents who were very open and honest about their mistakes. We did this, that was a mistake because it led this to happen. So as a kid, I didn't care about the circumstances. It was you're just growing up. That's just the way life is, right? I had a great childhood, but it trained me. Okay, well, if I don't want this financial outcome, well, I need to avoid doing this. That is a mistake that leads to this. So even though they didn't have what they wanted as the ideal financial situation for us growing up, the lessons that they passed down specifically about what not to do were almost just as valuable as lessons that other people might have received about what to do. They pointed me in the right direction early on. And so if you feel like it's too late, you've made too many mistakes, you're not going to have much to pass on, at the very least, be open and honest about your mistakes. Take responsibility, say this is what I did that caused these bad outcomes, avoid this. All right, so those are the 4 pillars to be able to create generational wealth that lasts. Natural question here is, okay, well, what kind of skills should I be teaching my kids? I'm gonna give you a couple pointers here. Number 1, sales. Sales is one of the most valuable skills that anybody can learn for any position, even if they're not going into sales for the rest of their life. If you want to be able to create wealth and protect your wealth, sales is a vital component of that. Growing your wealth is a combination of saving more than you earn, increasing your income as much as possible, and then taking all of that money and investing it in purchasing assets. If you don't know how to sell, you will be crippled in all 3 of those areas. Number 2, teach them the language of money, which goes back to talking openly about money with them, but understanding the language of money, having financial literacy, understanding how taxes work, understanding how investing works, understanding budgeting and debt and compounding interest, even just the basics. Having that foundation just naturally ingrained, teaching your kids the language of money is a skill in and of itself that should absolutely be focused on. And then number 3, what you pay attention to, or more importantly, what you measure, will grow, or I should say improve. They've done studies for weight loss with people where literally the only thing that they tell people that they have to do is step on the scale every single day and record your weight. That's it. There's no diet restrictions. You don't have to log your calories. You don't have to restrict yourself to eating any certain types of food, but the people know it's a weight loss challenge. And the only requirement is weigh yourself every single day. And just by that one habit change alone, people start to lose weight because they see the thing that they're measuring, which is the thing that matters. That's what they're paying attention to. And they notice on one day, hey, I ate a little bit less, the scale moved, or I ate something else, the scale moved. I'm going to do a little bit more of that. Maybe I went on a little bit of longer walk. Maybe it was just dehydration that day. Who knows? But you start to measure the thing that matters the most, and that metric starts to improve naturally. What you focus on, whatever you pay attention to, will improve. It's kind of like a law of life. And so financially speaking, for your kids, what do you want to improve? Make that a metric. Make that something that gets measured on a regular basis. Make that something that gets paid attention to. Not only for them, but also for you, being open about it with them. Okay, 2 very important notes before we wrap this thing up. Number 1, if your kids have the skills to create wealth, it actually doesn't matter how much you leave them, right? Because if you train them and raise them with the skills necessary to create wealth, you could leave them with 0 and they'll be able to create wealth. You could leave them with $1 million. They'll be able to grow that and protect that. You leave them with $100 million. They'll be able to grow that and protect that. It's about the skills, not the dollar amount. Because I'm sure you've heard there are plenty of ultra high net worth individuals, billionaires who have talked about this before and said, my kids are complete screw ups. They don't deserve anything. They rely on me for everything. They just waste everything I give them. I made mistakes early on. I spoiled them. I'm not leaving them a dime. I guarantee you those kids resent their parents for crippling them early on, for bailing them out every single time, not letting them learn their lessons. And those parents definitely resent their kids for screwing up, even though it's the parents' fault. But if you train your kids with the skills necessary to create and preserve wealth, then they will be able to handle that responsibility of any amount that you leave them. And the last thing is a very hard truth. For any of us who think we have a lot of time left on this earth, this can be a really, really difficult one to digest and accept. In the end, somebody will receive everything that is currently owned by you, or I should say entrusted to you. In that final analysis, you are not actually an owner of anything because an owner gets to keep something. An owner gets to choose when they don't have something anymore. We are not owners of anything. We are simply managers. We are in a position where we are charged with the responsibility of managing what is currently entrusted to us. And someday, we're going to be replaced. Everything that we currently own will soon be owned by someone else. But the cool part is we actually have a choice in determining who our successor will be. The Bible says a righteous man leaves an inheritance big enough to last multiple generations to his children's children. But it also says the unfaithful person, even what he has, will be taken away from him. So here are our 4 options on who gets to be our successor. Everything's going to get taken away from us when we die, but we do have a choice, and here are the 4 options. Number 1, the government. Now, if you think the government is going to be a great option for who gets to take your assets, who gets to own what you currently own, then you think that they're currently a great steward of the resources they have. You don't mind the $34 trillion of debt. You don't mind the decades of bombing children in the Middle East. You don't mind the endless wars. You don't mind the propaganda. You think they're doing a great job with the money. What I want you to do is right now, head over to irs.gov, click on the button that says make a payment. Just send them some of your money right now. There's no law that says you can't donate extra money to your taxes. Help out that national debt bill and start giving them some of what you own early. But if that's not you, we've got option number 2, which is leaving your money to charities. Now, there are certainly some good charities out there, but by and large, charities operate in what is inherently an unsustainable business model. And as a result of that, you have to fundraise in order to continue doing what you're doing. And as a result of that, many charities get caught up in the deceitful and dishonest practices of spending 95 to 98% of all their money on salaries and fundraising. And maybe sometimes 1 or 2% of the money goes to the thing that they're actually fundraising for. So if you are going to pass on everything you own to charities, my recommendation would stay local, meet the people running them, ask to see the financials. It's legally mandated. They have to post these things. You have to be able to look and see how much money are they spending on the things you're actually donating to. Do the work to make sure the money's actually going to a good cause. Option number 3. If you ignore everything in this video and you raise kids who are going to receive your inheritance and they know nothing about how to handle money, then here's who's actually going to get your inheritance. The business owners of the companies who your kids spend all of your money on, because they will spend it. They'll burn through it just like a lottery winner, just like a professional athlete. These stories where they get millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, and a couple years later they're bankrupt, they spent it all. All of that money gets fairly redistributed to actual producers in society through the consumption of the people who do not know how to handle resources and who waste it instead. It all gets spent and it goes to the ownership. It's redistributed. It goes to the ownership of the people who are actually producing. And so it's fair. It's not like government mandated redistribution. It's done through the free market, but it's sad. It takes away everything that you've built and leaves your kids with nothing and leaves your assets in the hands of others who are actually responsible. And then obviously option number 4 is that you raise your kids the correct way, where the chances are the highest that they will own and manage and grow, protect, and steward the wealth that you have built. And not only that, they will take ownership of it, do good things with it, grow it even farther. It will be passed on to your children's children, multiple generations. And the cool thing is you get to make that choice. But if you don't, just know that you're making a choice either way. The money's either going to go to the government, charities, other business owners who are the producers of the things that your kids waste all that money on and spend it all on, or you can train up your kids in the right way so that it will last multiple generations. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.